Hey everyone, welcome back to another week. We will be tackling another Odin project. This week is a project called Etch sketch. We'll be using HTML, but mostly JavaScript to be able to render a sketchpad to the browser, and you can color and draw and erase and reset the board. We will be adding a functionality to set the mode to coloring or not coloring. So right now it's not coloring, nothing happens. If we set it to coloring, you can see we start coloring. We'll be learning a lot of cool tricks to add and remove elements to the DOM. We can change the size of the container to anything between 2 and 100. As you can see, it's 2 by 2. Or if we do 100, it'll be 100 by 100 squares. If we try to go more than 100, it will not let me. If I do less than 2, it also won't let me. We'll be doing a little bit of validation. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this one and can follow along. Let me know down below in the comments if you guys have any questions or problems or anything like that. All right, I'll see you guys at the end. Thanks. Okay, everyone, let's get into the Odin project. I'm gonna change this to dark mode. It looks a little bit better, in my opinion. Follow the instructions to create a Git repository, create a web page with a 16 by 16 grid of square divs. Create the divs using JavaScript. Don't try making them by hand. It's best to put your grid squares inside of another container div. There's different ways. Flexbox or CSS grid. I think that we'll use CSS grid for this. Be careful with borders and margins. Okay. Set up a hover effect so that the grid divs change color when your mouse passes over them. I've already made a repository in VS Code. Let's just make all of our files. The first one, of course, index.html. The next one we're going to do, let's do a reset.css, styles.css. Let's do a main.js, and finally a .prettier RC. Index.html. Let's rename this sketchpad. Let's also link to our style sheets. First one we need to link to is reset.css. The next one we need to link to is our styles.css. And let's copy and paste code into here. I'm just going to get this off of the internet. Okay, we're going to want to create a few elements as we saw. Let's create a div class of flex container. Let's create another div with a class of title. Let's put an h1 tag in here. Name this sketchpad as well. Let's also open this up in a live server so we could see all the changes that we're making. See sketchpad. Okay, next let's make a div with a class of content. This div, I think, will have the sketchpad grid as well as all of the buttons that are going to modify the colors that we click. Let's make the grid right now. Let's give it a div with a class of board. That's going to be empty. And our JavaScript will go through and add the 16 by 16 square grid to that. Let's make a div with a class of buttons. So we'll have like a button, black. Okay, we don't have any functionality assigned to these yet, but we will add that later. Let's put an input field here. We'll keep the type as text, placeholder, size of board. Then let's set an initial value to 16. And let's set a button as well that says set size. When they click that button, it'll change the size. I think that's all we want to do here for now. We're not going to do any CSS. Actually, we might need to do a little bit of CSS for our board, and then we'll do our JavaScript. So down here, we just need to link to our script, and it is main.js. So let's go into our CSS and change the CSS of board here. So we want this to have a width. Right now, let's just do 500 pixels and a height of 500 pixels. We could come back later and change this. And we're going to want it to be display grid as well. In our main.js, let's grab that class so we can say let board equal document.query selector. And it's just going to be board.style.grid template columns equal to repeat 16 1fr. This will make 16 columns, and each column will have a width of 1/16 of the width of the container. So we could put whatever we want here, but since we want to do a 16 by 16 grid, we want 16 columns. We'll need to do the same thing for rows. So grid template rows. Once we make it so you can dynamically change the size of the board or how many squares there are, we will put a variable in here that you can change. This will allow us to create as many rows and columns as we want to. So we need for let I equal 0. I is less than 256, which is 16 times 16. I plus plus. Let square equal document dot create element. Just want to create a div. Let's say square style background color, set it to blue, and we need to append those to board. So we can say board insert adjacent element before end, and we just want to insert square. If we save that and open it up in our live server, we should just see a blue square, which we see right here. However, if we inspect these, we should see a whole bunch of divs. I think that's 16 by 16. That's the nice thing about creating HTML elements with JavaScript is, imagine trying to copy and paste these by hand. Like, your code would look really bad. There would just be a lot of repeating yourself. So with JavaScript, you can create as many elements as you want, and it does it instantaneously, which is nice. And we can change how many elements we want to create dynamically. Let's grab all of these and put them inside of a function called populate board. And we do want to take in a parameter. Let's take in size, and let's change these repeats to where we can put whatever size we want in here. We're gonna have to change these quotations to backticks, and we do $ open close brackets and put size. I'm just gonna copy this down to the rows, and this will ensure that it's always a square. Now we can say populate board of 16. That should give us the same exact result, which it does. Perfect. Now we can say function change size. We do need to take in a parameter here as well. We could just say input, and we'll go populate board with input. Now in our index.html, we can say on change, and we want to do this.value. This.value is going to be whatever value you've typed into this input field. So it'll call the function change size with whatever you type in. And I think this button should allow it to fire that function as well. So if I say 32, press set size, we should see 32 squares. However, if you notice, it's only populating squares in half of the game board. What I think we need to do is clear out any existing squares that are on the board, and then we can append them to them. So let's say let squares equal to board dot query selector all. Let's grab all of the divs. Squares dot for each div. We want to remove it, so we can just say div dot remove. Okay, after we do that, we need to change this 256 to be whatever size is squared. So we could say let amount is equal to size times size. We want to change this to amount. Now if we save and we view that, we should see, okay, right now it's 16 by 16. If we change it to 32, it doesn't look like it changed, but now if you'll notice, there's a whole bunch of little squares. That's working great. I think if I type in a really big number here, it's probably going to crash. We need to validate the input of what they type in here. We could say if input is less than 2, or input, actually let's say if input is greater than equal to 2, or if input is less than equal to 100, we want to populate the board. Otherwise, let's just console log an error. Let's open that up in the live server again. This needs to be an AND. If I say 5,000, we should have gotten a console log that says too many squares. If I change it to 50, it should have worked, which it did. We have 50 little squares now. And if I try to type in -5, it'll still say too many squares, but that's just the error message that we put in. It'll only accept values between 2 and 100. Now our game shouldn't be able to crash. We need to do one more thing. We need to set an event listener to each square that we're adding. So let's do that right here. We can say square.add event listener. We want to listen to a different event than a click. We want to listen to let's do a mouse over, and then we'll fire a function here. We could just say this.style.background color. Let's just set it to black for now and see what happens. So now nothing's happening. Okay, that works. If we change this now to 50. Okay, that's working so far. So far so good. Let's not do a blue. Let's just default to white. And now if we mouse over those, we should see and get colored in, which is great. Cool, that's working. Let's take this function out of here and let's actually make a function that's called color square. This will allow us to change the color that we want to. And as you'll notice, it still does the same thing. This keyword right here is pretty complex. I'm not going to go over it too much right now, but it's just referring to whatever square or whatever div we added the event listener to. We're actually calling a separate function for each square that got added, so don't think of this as being just like one function that we're creating. Every time we're adding a new square, we're creating a function that is just paying attention to that square. So that's what this is. It's going to refer to whatever square we are currently calling that function with. Let's add functionality to these buttons so we can change the color that we're using on this. We actually want a function at the top of the initial color. This needs to be a global variable. It doesn't need to be, but we're going to use the global variable to make it a lot easier to mutate. So we'll just say let color equals black. Instead of saying black right here, we could just say color. We need to make a function called change color. And in our index.html, we can look at all of these buttons. And we can say on click, we can say change color to black. And instead of white, let's just call this an eraser. Since the background color is white, it's pretty much actually an eraser. Now we can see if we choose eraser, it goes to white. If we choose gray, we can see gray. Perfect. Okay, we need to do random. Random's going to be a little tricky. I'm going to have to look up and Google how to do this one because I'm actually not sure off the top of my head how to do this. So I will be right back. Okay, how we're going to do random, let's just cut this and we can say if color is equal to random, else. So instead of color, we want to do a function. And I found this on the internet on Stack Overflow. Looks like this. And on random, we need to say on click, change color to random. You need to make sure you put double or triple equals here. Otherwise, it's always going to be random. Now we say random. If we switch to gray, we can do gray or white or random. Let's add functionality to reset. Reset should be pretty easy. I think we just have to do this. Let's just say function reset board. And add a click event to that. Okay, that doesn't work. Instead of removing the divs, let's just change the background color to white. So we could say div.style.background color is equal to white. Now, if we say reset, it'll clear the board. Cool, I think this is working quite well. We need to do two things really. We need to add styles to everything and make it look better. Once again, I'm probably going to do that off camera and then just walk you through everything after I do that off camera. There's a lot of trial and error with CSS and I don't want to spend an hour on screen with you guys trying to, as you guys make fun of me at my terrible CSS skills. However, what I think would be really cool is if we click and it doesn't draw anymore, but then if we click again, then it starts drawing. That would allow us to make specific shapes, and you don't always have to have a line leading off the screen onto the screen in order to draw. And in order to do that, let's define a variable. Let's say let click equal true. We're only going to color a square if click is true. So we can say if click. We need to set an event listener to pay attention to a click event, like on the whole div. So down here, let's go document dot query selector. Let's just just grab the body tag and let's say add event listener to click. And we're going to fire a function. What we need to do with this function is if click is true, we need to set it to false. And if click is false, we need to set it to true. So you can actually do that by saying click is equal to not click. This might look weird. We're assigning the value of click to whatever click isn't. With booleans, which is what click is right here, it's a boolean. It only could be true or false. So if it's not true, that means it's false. We can set it to right here. So if it's true right now, which it is, not click means it's false. So we are reassigning the value of click to be false. And vice versa, if it's false, then this will set it to true. We can see that I just clicked off. Now I clicked off, clicked. It would be nice if we saw something that told us whether we can draw or not. Let's go into our HTML and add a div, the class of mode, and let's say mode coloring. And now once we click, we're going to set now we can see we're in coloring. If we click, we're not coloring, we're coloring, not coloring. One annoying thing, however, is if we click on buttons, it does change that as well. So let's make it so if we click on a button, it doesn't change what mode we're in. Okay, what we need to do is grab all of this and we need to set E, which stands for event. If E.target. I think it's E.target.tag name does not equal button, then we fire this function. Now if we click buttons, it doesn't do anything. If we click something that's not a button, it changes. Okay, I'm going to go through and add CSS to everything and then walk you through what I did after I'm done with that. Okay everyone, we're done with the CSS. This is what it looks like after we're done with the CSS. See, I drew a little picture of myself here. Buttons, when you hover over them, they'll change color. Let's just put an error message if I try to set the size above or below what we're supposed to. Down below the input, let's put a div.error. Let's say input must be between 2 and 100. Okay, in our function change size, document dot query selector dot error dot style dot display is equal to none. Otherwise, let's set the display to flex. So if I try to put 500 here, input must be between 2 and 100. If we fix it, it goes away. If you guys also have a reset.css, I went ahead and deleted h1. We have an h1 container right here, sketchpad. I removed that from our reset sheet so that we have the initial h1 styling that normally comes with an h1 tag. And let's go into our styles.css. Okay, for our first div, we have flex container. We set the height to 100 viewport height, width of 100 viewport width, so it'll always take up the full screen. Display flex direction column, line item center, and then a background linear gradient of RGBA 96, 79, 252, 0.082 and white. Look, we have a darker purple up here and then it goes to white. So it gives us a cool linear gradient effect for the page. Our board div, we have a width of 80%, a height of 80%, display grid, background color of white, and then a box shadow. You guys can pause the video and copy this. That just gives the div this box shadow effect around it. The board on hover, we do a cursor pointer. Content, display flex direction column, line item center, minimum width of 300 pixels, minimum height of 300 pixels, a width and a height of 60 viewport width. So I set the height and width to the same thing so that it's always a square. It would be tempting to put 60 viewport height, but the height of your screen and the width of your screen usually aren't the same. But if you set both of them to 60 viewport height and width, then even if we change the size of this window, it should remain a square the whole time. And then a max width and height of 600 pixels. The title, we gave display flex, justify content center, so it's centered horizontally along the page. Buttons, margin top of 10 pixels, margin bottom of 10 pixels. A button element has a padding of 0.3 EM and 1.2 EM. A margin of 0, 0.3 EM, 0.3 EM, 0. A border radius of 2 EM. Text decoration of none. Font weight 600. Text align center. Transition all 0.2 seconds. So every transition that it gets will last 0.2 seconds. A button on hover, cursor pointer. I went ahead and in the index.html gave each of these buttons a different class. So the black button, we gave a class of black button, eraser button, gray button, random button. The reset board, we don't have a class, and the set size button, we don't have a class either. So they'll just retain their default class styling. Black button, the background color black, the font color white. On hover, gray button, background color of this gray, which is RGBA 128, 128, 128, 0.411. And then a font color of black. On hover, we do a different gray of RGB 95, 95, 95, color of white. Random button, a background of a linear gradient of 0.25 turn, F65CF, CFC. Background of a linear gradient of 0.25 turn, pound F65 CFC, comma, pound EB F8E1. Then a pound 583 CF6. On hover, it's a different linear gradient of pound 20 FF02, pound EB F8E1, pound AE CC03. Eraser button has a background color of RGB 255, 255, 255, font color of RGB 000, which is black. Eraser button on hover, background color of white, font color of 255, 255, 255, which is white. An input element width of 50 pixels. Our mode class, margin bottom 5 pixels, and then an error, display none. Cool, that should be it. I hope you guys enjoyed and were able to build a similar project that allows you to draw whatever you want.